Hi there. I'd like to talk a little bit today about what I think is one of the most pressing issues of our time, which is net neutrality and the repeal of Title II. So I'm going to explain everything kind of in as condensed a format as I can in order to give you the information that you should know without taking up too much of your time. So to start off with, an ISP, or an internet service provider, is the company that kind of delivers information from the internet to you. So in many cases in the United States, this is Verizon, Comcast, AT&T, Charter, just to name a few. Those are the more common ones. There are a lot more. There are many small ones as well, but those have a lot of market share in the country, so they're very important. So what you kind of need to know generally about this is that in 2015, a couple years ago, the Obama administration reversed kind of the way that the internet had been regulated by the federal government. So back in the 90s, the Clinton administration classified internet service providers under the Telecommunications Act of 1996 as an information service, which meant they're allowed to kind of tailor the information that you get, and they're allowed to kind of like, in a way, do what they want with that information. It's obviously more complicated than that, but generally it gave ISPs, internet service providers, more ability to change and manipulate the data that you see, which would allow them to kind of maximize speeds and do things like that, which would ideally help the customers, right? So it was done with good intention, obviously. And in 2015, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, which is the government body that sort of oversees the internet, if you will, decided to classify ISPs, or broadband providers, under Title II of this Telecommunications Act. And what this Title II classification means is that instead of being an information service provider, they're a telecommunications service. And so this means that they're treated the same way that a phone company would be treated, or that a basic utility company, like electricity, for instance, or water, would be treated. And so this decision kind of said the internet is a basic utility, just like water and electricity, and therefore ISPs can't regulate what parts of the internet people see. That might seem a little bit complex, so I'll break down into kind of what the part that people are very worried about that is, which is following that Title II classification in 2015, internet service providers can no longer choose to block certain content, or to slow down certain content and speed up other content, or make you charge extra for certain services. For instance, if you want to visit a certain website, they might charge you more for that than a different website, which is obviously very good for the consumer, because I mean, we as consumers, I speak for all of us, obviously, it's important that we have access to kind of the entire internet unfettered and not blocked by a corporation or the government, right? Free internet is obviously extremely important. It allows people to freely share their ideas, and it's probably one of, if not the most important part of the internet, in my opinion. So, again, a lot of this is bias. It's my opinion. It's my opinion that this Title II kind of classification was good for the internet overall, because it protects consumers from corporations like Verizon and Comcast restricting our content. The debate going on right now about net neutrality in Title II is centered on the current FCC, the chairman of which is Ajit Pai, who's appointed by Donald Trump. He's worked for the FCC for many years. He also worked for the Department of Justice, and he worked for Verizon as a lawyer, which is important considering how much Verizon and other ISPs will be affected by this decision. The FCC is a group of 5 commissioners who take votes on rules and laws that usually refer or have to do with the internet or other communication services. So now I'm going to address kind of the 5 main points on each side, because Ajit Pai is trying to get rid of Title II and therefore reclassify ISPs as an information technology, which will allow them to do more with our data. So his main points are as follows. 1, getting rid of Title II will create growth create infrastructure deployment, and also create jobs by doing so. 2, it will boost competition and choice among ISPs. 3, it will secure online privacy by putting the FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, back in charge of internet service providers and privacy on the internet. 4, it will restore internet freedom by taking the government kind of out of the market a little bit more. And 5, the previous decision was on party lines and lacked public input. Now the arguments for Title II. Number 1, it will protect against blocking, throttling, and extra charging for certain content, throttling being changing of speeds. 2, ISPs have threatened and tried to do some of these things in the past. 3, ISPs should not have control over our content. 4, the FCC needs to have the power to investigate ISPs and take action when bad practice is occurring. And 5, broadband internet should be treated as a basic utility, just like power and just like water. So those are the main points. Now I'm going to dig a little bit into kind of each one of them, because I think some of them for sure need to be a little bit more explained. So back to Ajit Pai's viewpoint, with creating jobs, deployment, and growth, this is based on the fact that, since 2015, infrastructure deployment has kind of decreased in speed from what it was prior. And Ajit Pai says that this is because of Title II, and getting rid of Title II will kind of do two things. I believe he hasn't quite explained this point, but I think the logic is that it will give corporations more money because they can charge consumers more, and therefore they'll be able to invest more in infrastructure. And also, they won't have the FCC breathing down their necks as much, so they'll be able to invest more without kind of asking for permission from the FCC every time they want to do something. The main statistic that Pai uses to kind of defend this viewpoint is that since kind of 2015, quote, domestic broadband capital expenditures decreased by 5.6%, unquote. And so this is really significant because for a long time, the internet has had kind of tremendous growth. And so the fact that it decreased in that time is obviously very significant. He attributes that to Title II. The second point that he has, which is that getting rid of Title II will boost competition and choice, I think is kind of just not the case. And I'll explain why, obviously. So he says that it'll obviously allow more kind of smaller ISPs to get started because they won't have kind of the same amount of regulations, they'll have less regulation. And I think that's probably true. That will probably increase smaller ISPs to serve local areas, which is good. But at the same time, there's not currently enough competition for there to be choice. As of 2014, the ISP reported that 38% of Americans have more than one provider for high-speed internet, high-speed being more than 25 megabytes download and 3 upload. So only 38% kind of have the option to switch providers. And if you look at certain different metrics, that 38% changes to even 24-ish%. So it depends quite exactly what you're measuring. But generally speaking, the majority of Americans don't have the option to quit if their internet service provider decides to block certain content or to charge them extremely high prices. And so that kind of is also one of the main points kind of for the other side, in that there isn't really anything stopping ISPs from doing this, because right now there's not enough competition in the marketplace for the free market to really do its job and for consumers to pick who wins and who loses. The third point that Pai makes about securing online privacy with the FTC is flawed in that there's a court case going on right now over whether or not the FTC will even have the ability to regulate ISPs and tell them what to do. And so it kind of depends what happens in that court case, but it could end up being that Title II is repealed and then the FTC also is kind of stripped of their ability to regulate, and suddenly we have internet privacy totally gone or run amok. The fourth point about restoring internet freedom, I would say is pretty absurd. So Pi is kind of trying to make the point that with internet regulation through Title II of internet service providers, the internet is less free. But the problem is that Title II regulations simply stop ISPs from making the internet less free. So I would think about it like this. Title II is getting rid of our freedom on the internet the same way the Constitution is getting rid of our freedom of speech. It's simply not. It's guaranteeing us that right. It's helping us achieve that right by limiting what a corporation can say we're allowed to look at. And so Title II is good for a free internet, regardless of what Chairman Pai might say. His fifth point about the decision being on party lines and lacking public input is totally legitimate. I mean, in all honesty, the previous decision, it was 3-2 vote, so on party lines, and the public wasn't even aware of the content of the rule until after it was passed by the FCC, which is extremely worrisome. However, the current vote is going to be on party lines, and the public opinion that we've got is pretty flawed. There's a whole hunk of data, to about 23 million comments at the moment that have been submitted to the FCC. Many of them are fake, many of them are automated. It's very difficult to count. So we don't really know, but while Chairman Pai has said multiple times that he's trying to be very transparent in this process, he's trying to let all Americans have a say, in reality, that might not be the case. It might simply be that he wants his way, and he's stated multiple times that really nobody can convince him otherwise, that he will be set on repealing Title II, but that he also wants all Americans to have an input. Those are slightly contradictory statements, but that's what he says. So now to the arguments for Title II. If you didn't notice, a lot of them are kind of the same theme, which is Title II is important to guarantee our freedoms on the internet. And as I already mentioned, 30% or less of Americans have access to more than one high-speed internet provider. And so in reality, people wouldn't be able to switch if they were getting ripped off or their content was getting blocked or something pretty horrible like that. And probably the scarier thing, which is the second point, is that ISPs have done this in the past. For example, I have a few examples lined up here. In 2007, Comcast blocked and kind of slowed. It's not clear which one they did, BitTorrent traffic for months and then lied about doing so. The FCC ended up investigating and ordering Comcast to stop. Then Comcast appealed the decision, ended up winning, which kind of said the FCC didn't have the authority to stop them. So hopefully Title II would prevent that from happening. In 2012, AT&T blocked FaceTime for users who didn't get a certain plan that would allow FaceTime. In 2013, a Verizon lawyer said that but for these rules, we would be exploring those types of arrangements, unquote. This is kind of meaning that if it weren't for the FCC open internet order, Verizon would be trying to make it so that companies would have to pay them to provide access to their sites. And a prime example of this happening is in 2014 when AT&T slowed data from Netflix, and then Netflix and AT&T struck a deal in which the traffic was sped up again, and Netflix had to pay AT&T an unknown amount of money, but likely many millions of dollars. Also in 2014, T-Mobile decided to exempt some media or music streaming services from their data limits, which advantages these services. So we kind of say, with our plan, let's just say you have like X amount of data to use per month. However, these specific music services don't apply to that, so you can stream as much music from them as you want, and it's not going to be kind of affected by your data count. So that's kind of the basics that I think everybody should know about net neutrality and Title II, because this affects everybody who uses the internet in the United States. So it's a big deal. And the FCC will be voting on Title II, whether they want to keep it or not, on December 14th, 2017, which is in just a few days. And in all honesty, there's not a whole lot we can do. But if you care about net neutrality, and you care about Title II, even a little bit as much as I do, I urge you to call or email your congressional representatives and let them know that you support Title II regulations for ISPs and you don't want to see Chairman Pai get rid of Title II because you care about a free and open internet, and Title II ensures that. Obviously, you can say anything you want. I'll have links with the statistics and quotes and whatnot that I used in this somewhere. If you have questions, comments, feel free to let me know, and I can talk a whole lot more about this if my phone had more storage for it. But thanks for listening. I hope you learned something.